Hey friends, I'm Greg Nettle and I serve as president of Stadia Church Planting. Our guest today is Yucan Chiu. Yucan's born in Chicago to parents of Chinese descent. He came to understand and experience Jesus in his teenage years while in California and began to help create and lead communities in his early 20s. His latest new church startup is Ethnos Church in New Brunswick. He holds bachelor's degrees in Sociology and Biology, graduate degrees in Theology, Urban Studies, and Missiology. This guy has absolute pedigree. He's been married for over 21 years and has two teenage daughters. And in addition to being a local church pastor and chaplain at Rutgers, Yucan serves at the Ethnos Network, at Stadia Church Planting, City to City in New York, and the CM2 Bridge Initiative. I'm excited to welcome Yucan Chiu. So good to have my friend, my colleague, my teammate, actually, Yucan Chiu, with us on the Church Planting Podcast. Welcome, Yucan.
Hey, it's great to be here, Greg. I'm glad I can join you today.
Yeah, so Yucan, you're one of the most amazing connectors, networkers, collaborators that I've ever had the privilege of kind of rubbing shoulders with, serving with, and being around. Man, what is that? Is it just the way you're wired? What do you attribute that to?
Oh man, Greg, thanks for that compliment. I really appreciate it. I think with all of our gifts and strengths, it's just something God has given us because of our stories and the journeys He's had us on. And so I feel like just my journey, that's included me, being an outsider at times, me having a rough upbringing before I met Jesus. Just some of these key components that were a part of my life, I think have just made me who I am. And I really appreciate the diversity of people around me. I appreciate the diversity of theology around me. And God has just kind of woven me together that way because of my journey.
Okay, let's talk about that journey a little bit. You mentioned being an outsider at times. Can you unpack that a little bit?
Yeah. So, I was born in the United States. I was born in Chicago, actually, but I'm the child of immigrant parents. I came in the country in the 70s. They actually got married here and then had me. And, especially with a name like Yucan, growing up in the 70s and 80s in places like Madison, Wisconsin, or Salt Lake City, Utah, I mean, there weren't a whole lot of people that looked like me around, and I just have a funny name. And I very quickly felt that kind of that difference and separation. I got made fun of a lot as a kid, and honestly, right before Jesus met me at age 14, I'd oftentimes cry myself to sleep, just thinking like nobody really cared about me. I just felt so isolated, so different, so alone. And thankfully, of course, we all know the amazing grace of Jesus and the good news of Jesus. I mean, He got a hold of me, and quite literally my life turned around after that. But yeah, being an immigrant kid back then could be a very difficult experience for sure.
Okay, so you were the outsider because I've watched you. And it's one of the things you do is you tend to bring those who are on the outside into the table. And so, that's made me become more aware of that. That's made the Stadia team become more aware of that. Let's talk to the church planters and church leaders that are with us right now. And why do that? What's the importance of that, of helping those who are on the outside become insiders?
Yeah. I think for all of us as church planters, we've probably had that experience ourselves too, if we think about it. Many of us as church planters, many of us are trying to create this new wineskin, right, for this work of the Spirit in our context. And we've probably all been in those meetings where the old wineskin is kind of listening to our vision and our heart, and they're just not getting it. And we kind of feel like, man, am I crazy for thinking this? Am I crazy for wanting to see lost people who are far from Jesus get to know Jesus? And so we've all probably, I think as church planters especially, had that experience. Now, some of us come from healthy church backgrounds that really engage church planting, and that's great. But if we can all tap into that and realize, wait, yeah, that's a part of how what Jesus does. Like, right, he tells us he leaves the 99 to go for the one. He's done that with us. He's inviting us to do that with others. And so it's just so key to tap into that. Now, I think it's even more so than as we think about not just lost people, but really marginalized lost people. And I feel like we see that so clearly in the work of Jesus, that Jesus is always on those margins, bringing people in. And I think many of us, as we study the scriptures, we're drawn to that as church planners. And so I just say, hey, go for it as a church planner. Don't hold back and lean into that.
Okay, but there's risk involved in that, right? Like I'm thinking about, so Jesus was certainly persecuted at the least, and probably in many ways crucified because he engaged with people on the margins, because of his heart for bringing people in. What can we expect as leaders when we start doing that?
Yeah. And Greg, that's such a real and honest question. And I think it can be hard, right? Especially in the world of church planning, where, especially if money is involved, we feel that pressure as church planners, right? To be like, shoot, like people are giving me money, and there's usually an expectation to see some type of quote unquote fruit with that money. And yet maybe we feel like God is calling us to a marginalized group that won't get the fruit that maybe this group wants, that's giving us money. And that's tough. I would hope that as mature followers of Jesus, we could have an honest conversation about that and just say, hey, can we rework some expectations in our church planning systems? And can we see something a little different? I mean, yeah, we all want lost people in the kingdom for sure, but the ways they get in the kingdom, the types, the situations may be a little different. And hopefully we can have maturity to enter into that, but it can be really tough. I mean, that's just one of many examples, right? That of how challenging it can be.
Yeah. So let's say I'm here, I'm leading a church, I'm getting ready to launch a new church startup, and I'm going, I get this and so forth, but I don't even know how to do it. Any practical advice, you'd give? I mean, you've been so instrumental in my own personal development of, looking for those of engaging diversity, racially and gender. And you've led me on practical steps. Talk about some of those practicalities of becoming that kind of leader.
Yeah. I think so much of it just comes from the first basic step of observation and just being aware of our real surroundings and having an open ear to listen to who is in our everyday surroundings. So many of us, because of the pace of the lives we live, we overlook our actual neighbors. We overlook our actual, gas attendants or the people who are at the stores that we frequent. And we're just not aware. And I think sometimes oftentimes it begins there, of being aware. And we'll be surprised maybe in different ways, right? Some of us may be surprised, like, oh my goodness, I am around people who always just look like me, think like me, talk like me. Is there something that needs to change with that? Others of us will note the radical diversity around us and be like, wow, why have I shied away from them? Or why have I just not noticed the radical diversity around me? I mean, that awareness, I think, begins to move us in different directions. And I think, Greg, I mean, honestly, I think you've been on this amazing journey yourself personally, that I don't know if you want to share on this podcast, but I think it's worth sharing about your journey of awareness and what that's led you to. Yeah.
And I so appreciate that. You've been so instrumental in that. And, so that led my wife and I 4 months ago to move into the city of Cleveland, but it started where we're now the minority. And that was intentional. And that was the primary reason for us moving here, was so we could experience diversity and become more aware, and we believe more like Jesus. But back to your point, that did start with an awareness. And what it started with, where we were living for the previous 25 years, you start looking around and you realize, gosh, it's people just like me. For me, it was all white people in our community, right? So we didn't even have the possibility of inviting diversity really into our home racially, because people just weren't there. And so I think that awareness is that discovery process, is so vital, like you're saying. And it might discover that there are people that aren't like you that you need to engage with, or that everybody's like you. And then you've got a harder issue like we had to wrestle through. Are we even going to stay living where we're comfortable and, have great friends and everything? And for us, that led us out. But that's not all of it. There's also an intentionality that you tend to lead people through, Yucan. Can you talk about the intentionality of some of this process?
Yeah. You know what strikes me about Jesus, right? Our model for everything is that Jesus was always intentional. And a lot of his intentionality in regards to like helping others, helping his 12 see the wider picture of the kingdom. So much of it involved displacements, displacing ourselves for the sake of the kingdom. And I think the classic story, of course, is John 4, where Jesus doesn't have to go through Samaria, but he says he has to go through Samaria. And the reason is he wants to displace his disciples to experience a wider perspective of what the kingdom of God is about. And so I think that's something, we've done at Stadia intentionally. And I know a lot of people have commented on how that's been helpful, from leadership, the decision of where we have our leadership meetings, to what we do at our leadership meetings, to who, what restaurants we eat at and who we invite from the city to speak.
Okay. I got to stop you there, because I just know I'm listening to this. I'm going, give me some specifics. So talk about that, because it's been beautiful and it's been such a blast. Talk about some of the specifics of where we met, kind of restaurants, who we met with, all of that stuff. Unpack that a little bit.
Yeah. So, I had the privilege of helping the whole Stadia staff, 60 plus people, get together for the first time since the pandemic, in person. And from what I was told, usually the team rally was somewhere, the location was just somewhere convenient and helpful and relaxing, which is all good. But because of the journey Jesus had us on as an organization, this time around, I was like, well, what if we intentionally went somewhere that would force us to think about the kingdom and the movement of God in just a wider sort of way? So we chose, of all places, the city of El Paso, Texas, a border town with Mexico, for the sake of just seeing something different and living and experiencing something different. And there's nothing quite like spending a few days on the border to see what happens with our neighboring country, Mexico. And then we got a chance then to hear directly from second-gen Latino church planters, and just realize, oh my goodness, on one hand, we have so much in common. On the other hand, we have so much to learn from as they have to struggle and contextualize in their areas. And so that's just one of the many experiences we've begun to go on together at Stadia.
Okay, so and then you took us, we were out, and for our leadership, our navigation team, we were out in San Francisco. Talk about that, the restaurants, the people there.
Yeah. So we, with the nav team, went to San Francisco, and if you're familiar, of course, with the Bay Area, especially, San Francisco region, that the Asian American population is huge. And so we had a moment where we had dim sum all together. And I know I think almost everyone on the nav team, it was like their first time having dim sum. And it was a great food experience. It was very personal to me. I grew up having dim sum weekly with my parents. And then we invited Asian American church planters to the table, and just to hear their stories and make sure we understood what they were going through. We were contextualizing our work for Asian Americans in the States. And so it was a good experience, a good first step for us.
It was amazing. And so I guess what I wanted everyone to hear, there's this awareness that we start with, and then you move kind of into this intentionality, where you're actually displacing yourself, which I love that observation, that you make there, where, if everybody's like us around, us right now, well, we have to go somewhere else to experience things. But it could also be, we just happened, we had to have a meeting, in a specific area. And so rather than making it in our normal comfort zone, we intentionally went out of our comfort zone to experience a culture very different from ours, while we were there. And any team or leader can do that, right? Okay, but the other really important thing, that you've helped us with is we think about collaboration, is what I would call, there are postures of the heart. So that as we do engage with Asian church planters or Latino church planters and Latina church planters, I just had, Julie and I just had dinner with some of our Latino church planters this past week, and it was such a beautiful thing to have dinner and to continue to learn from them and their experience, right? But there are these postures that we have to assume. Can you talk about maybe a couple of those postures as leaders that we always need to have in our heart?
Yeah. I think it's really easy as a leader, especially a seasoned leader, a leader that has had a great success, maybe in one context. It's really easy to think that what we've discovered applies to all people equally. And like, oh man, we've discovered the answer to how to do certain things, especially in the world of church planting. I think thankfully more and more in our diverse world, we realize that all that God brings us through is oftentimes contextual to the location. Which means as we think about people and other sort of situations and contexts, we begin to realize, my goodness, my answers are good for my context, but there's something very different and amazing going on in their context that I should probably listen to and learn from. And so this posture of learning, this posture again, that begins with awareness to realize, okay, we're all in different contexts and God is already there in those contexts and doing something amazing through his diverse children. And so maybe I need to come in with a posture of listening and of learning. And from there begin to realize, wait a second, if we are going to succeed in planting more churches, we're going to actually have to truly be partners together for the unknown frontiers that are ahead of all of us. I think maybe the mistakes of any people group, right? This doesn't just apply to white suburban Americans. It can apply to Asian American churches in our context and my family, my church of upbringing. It's just easy for us, and we get it on one hand, but it's still easy for us to just normalize our experience and think that we learned it this way, it's the right way. And just forget that, oh my goodness, God is so much bigger than us. How can we listen and learn and really collaborate together for the future?
So there's this posture of learning. There's a posture of listening. Talk about the global situation, because for myself growing up, we were the great white saviors of the world. We're going to go plant churches and so forth. But that's not the way we need to be looking at it today.
Yeah, definitely not. And, thankfully we've had many, many decades now, and some would even argue centuries, of the Church of Jesus growing so much faster and stronger outside of the West, outside of North America, outside of Europe. And, for those who are just observant of that, again, it's so much just starts with being a basic observer, right? The more we observe that, the more we realize, oh my goodness. I mean, if the most rapid church growth in modern, not just in modern, but in all of church history has happened in the country of China, or some would argue right now, perhaps in the country of Iran, perhaps we need to stop and listen and try to understand what is the Spirit of God doing there, so we can all join in and so that we can see some of that fruit in our context. Right. And so, it's just fascinating, I think, to me and really to us Stadia that the more we just expose ourselves to that, the more we realize, wow, we have a lot to learn. We have a high need to partner, not just so we can bring something to them, so that they can bring something to us, and we can actually all work together. So really funny, right? Today at our executive team, our navigation team meeting, I got to share with our nav team, something we're really wrestling with and trying to develop, and we leading the charge with, at least in North America, is this idea of platform, right? And I had a chance to sit down with one of the largest Chinese American churches last week and found out they were running the digital church gathering for all Mandarin speaking Christians like in the world.
Wow.
And, you go to their website and you're like, oh, they're already developing a platform too. It's like, well, I guess we should probably slow down and like, hey, let's figure out, what's happening, because they may have discovered some things we haven't already, and they may be way ahead of the game. And, it was a good moment for us to just realize, oh yeah, we're significant, but we are just a part of this larger global church. And it's good to remember that and keep learning.
Oh, and that's just the value of collaboration, right? I mean, what if we could partner together with that church and with the church in India, and to learn best practices from each other. And and now we don't have to translate this into Mandarin, because they've already got that all done. It's their home tongue, it's just, it's crazy. And, you kind of think about the church in India that's multiplying so rapidly. I mean, tens of thousands of churches every year. Now they're not the traditional launch large American church plants, but they're reaching massive numbers of people by rapidly multiplying. I think about the church in South America, which is doing probably bivocational or co-vocational better than anywhere else in the world right now. And we could just keep, the church in Nepal, where the church planters take an oath to Jesus till death because they're in a persecuted region. And there's so much we can learn from each other. And I guess as we think about the church worldwide, the United States church, the most generous financial church in the world, right? And historically so. And there's so much we can all learn from each other if we have this posture of awareness and posture of humility and listening, and then intentionality. So give us some, okay, I'm going, I love this. I love what Yucan's talking about. But how do I get started in this, Yucan? What's, is there a conference I go to? Is there a podcast I should listen to other than this one, of course? Do you know what I'm saying? Should I get mentored? Should I move? How can I start?
Again, as we start with this posture of awareness, my hunch is that if God really wants you on this journey, God has probably already placed someone around you that can be a coach, a guide, a mentor figure for you in this journey, right? If you're listening in and you're like, oh man, right? Like, well, I don't have like a Yucan figure or this top church leader that I can ask all my questions to. That you're thinking the wrong way. No, God, if God wants you on this journey, probably there's somebody around you that's already a worthy guide. And sometimes it may be someone that's very overseen in your life that you just need to grow an awareness to. I think about one of our team members was telling me on Stadia, he was telling me their journey, and they realized, I think it was their son's high school custodian, they realized was their coach for all things related to kingdom diversity. And they developed a relationship with that custodian and put themselves in a posture of learning and friendship, and just realized, my goodness, I have so much to learn from you. And that's how their journey really began. And I know that's such a powerful story. And so I think the first thing is just ask God, hey God, okay, who do you put around me that I can begin to develop a real relationship with and just learn from, because I'm not where I need to be. And from there, just trust that God will begin to show you the next step and show you the step after that and kind of go from there, slowly but surely.
And, the other thing is, if you're a church leader or a church planter, a new church starter, my goodness, look for churches that are different from you. Maybe they're made up a different racial context, right? And say, how could we partner together? And don't go in with all the big ideas, but it's two things here that you've taught me, Yucan. It's one thing to be inclusive at God's table, which is a picture, all out of the New Testament, where people of every tribe, nation, race, and tongue are coming together and they're sharing the table together with Jesus. But it's perhaps even more important is building the table together. And that comes back to, okay, when we partner with a church that looks different from us, maybe worships differently from us. As we gather, we sit down together at a table and talk about how can we build a new table together and learn from one another, right?
Yeah. That's huge. That's huge.
So Yucan, all that, we've got, young church planters out there, and I think this next generation, the newer generation that are starting churches, this is really at the top of their minds and hearts. This idea, I see it now, this idea of collaboration more than ever. And so, I'm older than you, but you're older than maybe that brand new generation too. So what would you say to those brand new ones who are really saying, we want to go after this?
Yeah, it is. It's interesting, right? Because I lead a church of young people too, and my oldest is now in college, and I think about conversations I've had with her. I think it boils down to the same things of figuring out. First of all, we always need to figure out who we are in Christ, like as a young church planter. Like that just has to be. We have to be rooted well in Jesus. This idea of humility definitely is still going to apply. And so as we get rooted in Jesus and as we're humble and just practice some of the things we've talked about here in terms of just observing, knowing how to build, relationships where we're posturing ourselves properly, I think things will take off. I do think for younger generation leaders, as I've, listened to you and thought through kind of some of the things I've heard from you, that what I've appreciated is that there is a desire also to learn from other generations. We just had a global gathering for our network. If I take off my Stadia hat and put on my Ethnos Network hat, and it was really a fascinating gathering because not only did we have like people from all kinds of countries together, but at our gathering, we had pastors and leaders from probably 5 generations. And so it was pretty fascinating. And it was amazing that the 20-year-old was posturing themselves to listen to the 60, almost 70-year-old, and vice versa. And I think there's just something beautiful about that. It requires a unique type of humility and a unique type of just Jesus-centeredness to realize, we really are all in this together. And so even in our organization, I think about some of our veterans, like John Wassman, for example, just an amazing long-term Stadia leader. The ways he's postured himself to listen to the 20-something leaders, and then vice versa. Our 20-something-year-old leaders will humble themselves to really learn from his wisdom. Man, if we can do that, not just across race and gender, but also generation, to really have those 3 things together, I think we're an unstoppable force as the Church of Jesus if we can posture ourselves like that. And so young leaders, I commend you if you're already doing that. I encourage you to keep doing that. And of course, keep speaking up, because God has called you to be a leader already at that young age, and go for it. I know Greg and I, Greg, you and I both planted our first churches in our 20s. So we were there at one point, and we believe in what God has given you, young leaders. So go for it, please.
Yucan Chiu, thank you for being on the Church Planting Podcast. Can't wait to share the next stage of our journey together.
Yeah, no problem, Greg. Thanks so much.